Okay, so we're going to get started with chapter P, and the P stands for preparation for calculus, basically the prerequisites. And this should be easy. You should find all of these lessons in this chapter simple to do. So P.1 Graphs and Models, this is page 1 of your notes. Okay, so example 1, sketch the graph of y equals x squared minus 2. Now, when I say sketch the graph, I really want you to be able to do this by hand. And by hand means you're actually going to need a table. So x's and y's. And I always have the issue where nobody knows, well, what values how do I pick my values? And if you're sketching something, you're basically picking the values, and you're picking the x's. And it's just easiest, normally, to just go from like -2 to +2, or -3 to +3, or something along those lines. And then once you have your x's that you chose, okay, we decided that these would be the numbers we were going to use. Then you take those x's, you plug them into the equation to get your y value. So we're going to use our function, and we're going to have -2 squared minus 2. So that's 4 minus 2, which is +2, and that's my y value. And then we'll just repeat. All right, so I plugged in -1, 0, 1, and 2 into the equation, and I got my y values. Now this is what you would use to graph. And now usually sketching does not have to be 100% perfect. That's a horrible straight line, as you can see. But the idea is that you should be able to figure out what this function either looks like or have an idea of what the graph is doing. So a simple sketch does not mean perfection. Okay. All right, so -2, 2. That's my first point. So -2, +2. I'll just graph that here. Okay, -1, -1. So -1, -1. And then we have 0, -2. Oh, look at that. -1, -1. Nice. -1, -1. And then 0, -2. Now 1, -1. And then 2, 2. 2, 2. And there are the basic points for my graph, which happens to be a parabola. Nothing perfect, but I could use this to solve some kind of problem. Now, I need you to know how to do this by hand, but I also need you to know how to do this with a calculator, a graphing calculator. And it is important that you learn how to use the graphing calculator for the AP exam. To graph an equation, I don't know if you have previous experience. Hopefully you do. You're going to hit the y equals button, and then you're going to enter the equation to where it says y1, like this. And usually that's the very first one. It should be, anyway. No reason for it not to be. And then you're going to hit the graph button. And you'll have your graph. Now you can adjust the window to zoom in on different parts of the graph, like so. All right, let me clear this. I always do that. Hit it with the thing. Okay, so clear. Oh, I need to clear it down here. That's the problem. All right, so start off by hitting y equals. That should pop up. Very first line, y1, we just enter the equation, x, and then squared, and then -2. Okay, I'm done with that. I would hit graph. You can see all the strokes on the left side here. And there's my graph. Now, I need you to be able to zoom in on this if you ever need to. So you hit the window button. Did I hit it? Window button. Okay, and that comes out. Now, it might be a little confusing, but you really want to focus on the first two. Well, let's say the first 6. Y min, or X min, X max, X scale. Scale means, you know, the tick marks. You want them to go by ones. That's fine. So you never really have to change that. Unless for whatever reason one day you might need it to go by halves. So you'd put 0.5 or by 0.25, etc. But scale of 1 is usually normal. Now minimum means the smallest x value, and max means the biggest x value. So what if I change this? Let me delete the -10 and put 5. So -5, that means that's the smallest x I'm going to see. And then for the max, oops, I went down too many times. For the max, let's go +5. This is getting hit twice. Anyway, so down to y minimum. Let's say I want it to go down to -5 as well. And then the maximum will also be a 5. So now, because I made my mins and my maxes smaller numbers, when I hit graph again, this should be zoomed in. And compared to what it was, it is zoomed in. There's a faster way to zoom in and out, of course. If you hit the zoom button, 2 is in, 3 is out. And then 6 is standard, which means it gives you a 10 by 10 always. Min and maxes are 10s for x's and y's. So for example, if I hit 6 right now, it's going to go right back to what it was. But if, let's say, I really want to zoom in, and I really want to zoom in to this part right here, I would just, stroke the cursor down till it gets to there, hit the zoom button down the middle there, and then hit 2. And then now that I'm back to the graphing screen, hit enter, and it should zoom in. And it zoomed in, it focused on the area where the cursor was. Okay? Now this is basic graphing 101, which hopefully you know how to do already. All right, back to it. Example 2. Example 2, we're finding the x and the y-intercepts. Now you learn this in Algebra 1. If I want to find the x-intercepts, I'm going to make y 0. And if I want to find the y-intercepts, I'm going to make x 0. Now the y-intercepts are usually the easier one to find. So if I take my function, so I have y equals 0 cubed minus 4 times 0. Oh look, y equals 0. That was really easy. But for the x-intercept, that usually requires some more algebra. Let me write the equation again. This time I'm going to make the y's into zeros. Well, I have an x cubed and I have an x. So there's no pretty canceling out here. So I do see that there's an x in common for both terms. The first is x cubed, so there's really 3 x's there. And then the 4x, there's just 1 x. So I'm going to factor out an x. So I have x factored out, and if I factor out an x, I'm left with an x squared from the first term. And if I factor out the x from the -4x, I'm just left with -4. Now, factoring out allows me to go ahead and solve this to figure out what x equals. And I'm going to use the zero product property. And again, this is just Algebra 1. And the zero product property states that if I have something times something and it equals 0, then logically, one of these somethings must be 0. But since we don't know which one, in the zero product property, we just assume they're both 0. And we try to figure out what would they be in order to make them 0. So x is going to be 0. And then this one, the second term, x, or the binomial, x squared minus 4, we're going to go ahead and take that and set it equal to 0. And then we're going to solve for the x algebraically in order to figure out what x equals. Okay, so this is final. But over here, we're going to add 4 to both sides. X squared equals 4. Got to get rid of the square. By square rooting, I get rid of the square. So now I have x equals 2, but technically plus or minus 2. So our answers, right, for our x-intercepts are x is 0, x equals -2, and x equals +2. That means that this graph goes through the x-axis 3 times, at x equals 0, at x equals -2, and at x equals +2. Now there's a way to do this on the calculator, and I'm going to write down the steps. All right, so these are the directions. You're going to hit y equals button. You're going to plug in the equation where y1 equals is the very first slot. Then you're going to hit the second button. Then you're going to hit the trace button. Then you're going to hit the number 2, which is for zeros. And that's what gets you the x-intercept. Move the cursor to the left of the curve where the graph hits the x-axis. So let's say here's my x-axis and y-axis, and here's my graph. So you're going to have a little cursor, and you're going to move it to the left of where the graph hits the x-axis. So let's focus on this x-axis, x-intercept. That'll be the left. So you would move the cursor about there. Then you would hit enter, and then you would move the cursor up to this side, which is the right side. And then you would hit enter, and then it asks you for a guess. You do not have to guess, just hit enter again. And then on the bottom, it'll say x equals blah, 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 whatever that is, and then y equals 0. Okay, now the next example is actually looking for a different, I guess, a different thing. These are asking you specifically for the x-intercepts. The next problem is asking for the zeros, which are technically the x-intercepts. So the instructions are exactly the same, but I'll actually show you how to do that one. So this one, good old-fashioned elbow grease, you do it by factoring. And I know you're like, oh yes, I would love to factor this, right? So first off, in order to factor an equation, you need it to equal 0. So that equals negative 18 is not going to work. So we need to move that over to the left side of the equation by adding it. So 2x squared minus 13x plus 18 equals 0. Now, if you recall from Algebra 1, the first coefficient is called a, the second coefficient is called b, and the last number is called c, the constant. Now, factoring, there's an easy way to do this. You just have to remember how to. You take the a number and the c number and you multiply them. So in this case, a is 2 and c is positive 18. So you multiply those numbers and we get 36. Then you figure out, okay, what is b? And b is negative 13. And then you're like, well, I need two numbers that multiply up to 36. Right? You see how I multiplied these two? Well, I need two numbers that multiply up to 36. And then I need those two numbers, whatever they may be, I need them to add up to negative 13. So take 36 very quickly, figure out multiples of 36. So like 1 and 36, and 2 and 18, and 3 and 12, and 4 and 9. 5 doesn't work, 6 and 6, 7 doesn't work, and then figure out what else might work. Then take the numbers and add them. So I have 37, 20, 15, 13, and 12. I needed them to add up to negative 13. None of these are negative. Why? Because all the numbers were positive. So then you must be, or have to think in your brain, OMG, how could I make these numbers negative? Well, if I add them, and in order for them to be negative, they should be negative themselves. So hopefully it's obvious that we're going to work with these numbers here. If I take negative 4 and negative 9, they definitely do add up to negative 13. A negative times a negative is a positive. So if I were to multiply them, I would end up with positive 36. So we have our winner, winner, chicken dinner. All right, so factor. Set up your parentheses. Our variable is an x. We figured out that it's negative 4 and negative 9. Now, my a value happened to be a number 2. So since the a value is not the number 1, I actually have to like compensate for that. I have to be like, ooh, that 2 is there. So let me divide these two numbers by 2. So now I have x minus 4 divided by 2, which is 2. and we have x minus 9/2. Now, when you're factoring, you're actually not allowed to leave your factors in fraction form. So in order to get rid of that fraction, the only way to do it is to multiply by 2. So now I have 2x minus 18/2, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. The shortcut way of looking at this is, let's just put u right here, and then get rid of the fraction. That would be another way of looking at it. So here are my values, and then once again, the zero product property. Something times something equals 0. One of them must be 0. Don't know which one, so we make pretend that they're both 0. So x minus 2 equals 0 gives me x equals 2. And 2x minus 9, and I'll write this one out, equals 0. I get 2x equals 9. I get x equals 9/2. Which is familiar, and it should be familiar. It's the opposite of that number there. Negative 9/2 is now positive 9/2. And here are my zeros. Whenever you're asked to find the zeros, you are asked to, basically they're asking you to find the x values. Now that was the algebraic way of doing it. Calculator way. It's the same exact steps as the previous example. I'm just going to go ahead and do it on the actual calculator. X or y equals, I'm going to have to clear that equation out of the way. My new equation is 2x squared minus 13x and plus 18. Remember, we had to move that 18 over. Second, the trace button. And the second button is actually making me open up the calculate menu. And I want number 2, so I'm going to hit the 2 for zeros. My graph is currently zoomed in because remember I zoomed it in previously. No big deal. Hit the zoom button. We're going to go with number 6 for standard. So it gives me a 10 by 10. And so now I'm trying to figure out where does this graph hit the x-axis. And there's 2 places which are obvious, hopefully, to you. And I have to check them one by one. So second, calculate. I'm going to have to do that again because of the whole zooming in thing. If this calculator catches up with me. Did it not think I hit calculate? Let's try it again. Okay, there we go. Back to number 2. All right, so it's asking me for left bound. Oh, this thing is always going crazy. All right, I'm going to have to do it again. Second, calculate. All right, here we go. The computer screen is really sensitive, and it acts up sometimes. All right, so second, calculate number 2. Now it's asking me the question, left bound. So I'm going to take my cursor, if it ever appears, because I do not see it at the moment. Maybe it's really high up. There it is. All right, I need to be on the left. So I'm going to go for that 0 right there, the one on the left. And I'm on the left of that intercept. So I'm going to hit enter. And then now I'm going to go to the right of it. Just enough. Doesn't have to be any special. Oh boy. All right. So I did the left bound, I did the right bound, and now it's asking me for a guess, but I do not have to guess. Hit enter. And it's telling me that my zeros is located at, or that 0 is located at x equals 2, which obviously we had already found. And then that means the other one is the 9/2. So if I want to do that one, we're going to hit second, calc, number 2, and hopefully the calculator is friendly this time. Left bound. So I'm headed over to the other 0. That'll be the left. Hit enter. And then I'm going to go to the right of it. And I went a little far up. No big deal. It's on the right. That's all that matters. Hit enter. I don't have to guess. And then 4.5, which is 9. Okay, so when finding points of intersection, usually if you have 2 equations, all you have to do is set them equal to each other. If you set them equal to each other and solve, those will be the points of intersection. So here, I made it so that we're actually going to have to solve each of these for y. And solving for y just means that you're going to have to work to get y alone. Okay, you're going to have to isolate the y's. So the first one, x squared minus y equals 3. So to isolate the y, I would add y to both sides. So x squared equals 3 plus y. And then the 3 has got to go. So x squared minus 3 equals y. And I could leave it like that, or write it this way. Doesn't matter, whatever you're most comfortable with or just must be able to do or see, because that's the way you were trained. No big deal. Now the other, x minus y equals 1, same idea. So x equals 1 plus y. I've got to get rid of the 1, so x minus 1 equals y. Or, of course, y equals x minus 1. Now, the idea of this is, oh, both of these equations equal y. So that means that if y, let's take the blue one, y equals x minus 1, that means I can come over here and be like, well, y is x minus 1. Basically, substituting, right? Substitution, which you learned in Algebra 1. All right, so now I can go ahead and solve this by just regular old algebra. Let's say subtract the x, negative 1 equals x squared minus x minus 3. Oh, let me add the 1. So let's see, negative 1 plus 1 is 0. X squared minus x minus 2. Oh, look, easy peasy lemon squeezy. I need two numbers that multiply up to, let's see, 1 times negative 2. B is negative 1. So I need two numbers that multiply up to negative 2. So let's see, 1 and 2 multiply up to 2. For it to be negative, one of them has to be negative. And then they have to add up to negative 1. So how can I make these add up to negative 1? Oh, let's make the 2 negative. And there we go. Plus 1 minus 2. And there are my answers. Using the zero product property, we get x equals negative 1 and x equals positive 2. Now, you can do this on the calculator. And I'm not talking about the factoring part. I'm talking about at the very beginning. We're going to use these equations. This one and this one. We're going to plug these into the calculator. I'm going to write down the steps. All right, so here are the directions. You should practice that. Now, the beauty of the videos at home are that you can pause, rewind, rewatch anything or any example that you need, and hopefully using a computer, even cell phone, tablet, whatever, you have easy access to the internet. So there are other videos out there and instructions that you can use.